Rain hammered the cracked stained glass over the foyer as Laura Bennett shoved another box marked M.A.'s books against the wall. The old mansion smelled of dust, pine cleaner, and something darker, like metal after lightning. "Ma'am, step away from the fireplace," Deputy Harlan said, boots leaving wet prints on century-old oak. Two neighbors hovered on the porch, pretending to check on the new folks, but their eyes were glued to the scene. Behind the deputy stood Cole Whitaker in a charcoal suit that looked too expensive for Maple Hollow. He held a court packet like a weapon and smiled the way men do when they already own the room. Laura's daughter, Mia, clutched her asthma inhaler with both hands. Her sneakers were soaked through, laces tied in clumsy knots Laura had made in the car. "What is this?" Laura asked, voice shaking despite her effort to steady it. The key from Aunt Eleanor's envelope was still warm in her pocket, pressed against the cheap wedding band she wore on a chain since the divorce. Cole tapped the top page. "An emergency order. I'm authorized to search this property for assets tied to an active fraud investigation." "Fraud?" Laura's stomach dropped. "I inherited this house yesterday." "And yet here you are," Cole said, eyes flicking over her thrift store coat, the taped boxes, the child. "People like you don't inherit houses like this. You inherit bills." The words hit harder than the cold. Deputy Harlan cleared his throat, embarrassed but firm. "Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Whitaker claims the former owner concealed property belonging to his family. We have to do this by the book." Cole didn't even pretend sympathy, and he walked to the parlor wall where Laura had noticed odd wallpaper seams, then to the grandfather clock that hadn't worked in decades. His fingertips traced the wood as if greeting an old friend. "Funny," he murmured. "The Blackridge estates always keep their secrets close." Laura stepped in front of Mia. "You're scaring my child." Cole leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Sell to me today and I make this go away. Refuse and your new home becomes a courtroom you can't afford." Mia's breath hitched. The mansion creaked like it was listening. From inside the silent grandfather clock, a soft click answered, followed by a faint, steady blinking red light behind the glass. The house had been recording everything. Laura kept one hand on Mia's shoulder and the other on the cold glass of the clock, when the red dot blinked like a heartbeat. Deputy Harlan pretended not to notice, but his eyes kept sliding to Cole Whitaker's folder. Laura swallowed, tasting penny blood fear and anger in her dry throat. She was 42, a night shift nurse aide at Maple Hollow Care, until budget cuts erased her name from the schedule. Since then, she'd cleaned houses, returned cans, and stitched Mia's winter coat at the kitchen table. Her ex sent promises, not checks, and the bank sent warnings every single week. The inheritance letter felt unreal, but it came with 1 year of taxes paid and a key. Laura told herself a roof mattered more than pride. Every morning she measured Mia's nebulizer medicine, wrote the date on a sticky note, and made oatmeal stretch with water so Mia could breathe. In the car ride here, Mia asked if mansions had warm bedrooms, but Laura lied and said yes, because children deserved hope. She'd burned her last tank of gas to reach this place. Her phone held 3 missed calls from a collections agency and 1 from the pharmacy about Dad's refill. After Cole's menacing offer, he strutted out to the porch to take a call, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Deputy Harlan stayed behind, shifting his hat in his hands. "Ma'am," he murmured, "I don't like this." Laura nodded, memorizing his tone like evidence for a day she'd need. She opened the clock's glass panel and saw a tiny camera wired into the wooden frame, dusted clean as if someone serviced it yesterday. Laura snapped photos with shaking fingers, then slid Aunt Eleanor's probate papers into her tote. If Cole wanted her gone, she'd learn why, fast before Mia saw. That night, she tucked Mia into a sleeping bag on the least drafty floor, whispering prayers her mother taught her. Outside, tires crunched gravel, then stopped. No knock followed. Just silence and the faint click of the porch camera turning on. Laura stared at the ceiling, waiting for whoever was testing her. At 2:13 a.m., her phone buzzed with a new email. Notice of account restriction. The sender was the county clerk's office. Laura sat up, heart hammering, and checked the clock again. The red light blinked twice, like a signal. Then a second hidden camera blinked from the staircase rail above her. By morning, Laura's coffee tasted like burnt pennies. She sat on the mansion's kitchen floor with the laptop balanced on a moving box, refreshing her bank app until her thumb ached. Restricted, it kept saying, as if one word could erase rent, eat groceries, and her father's insulin. Her dad, Frank Bennett, was in room 214 at Maple Hollow Rehab after a stroke. Before he lost speech, he'd squeezed her fingers and mouthed, "Don't quit." The facility billed by the week, and Medicare covered only what it felt like. Every Friday, a social worker called with the same gentle threat: pay the balance or we have to review placement options. Laura heard the unspoken part: send him somewhere cheaper, farther, where she couldn't visit. Mia needed her too. The school nurse had already warned Laura that too many absences could trigger a report. One more winter without steady heat and Mia's lungs would tighten again. Laura kept inhalers in her purse, her car, and now in a drawer she hadn't even bought yet. Leaving Maple Hollow would mean starting over with no job, no childcare, and no credit. And her mother was gone. Her sister lived 3 states away and hadn't answered texts since the divorce. And the church ladies who used to bring casseroles now avoided her eyes, as if poverty were contagious. Even the landlord from their old apartment had said, "Maybe your ex can take the kid." Laura still heard that sentence in the dark. At 9:07 a.m., her phone rang. Pharmacy. "Miss Bennett, your father's refill is on hold. Insurance rejected it." Laura closed her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "He can't miss doses." The clerk sighed. "Then you'll need the copay today." Laura looked at the granite counter, at Aunt Eleanor's key, at the blinking cameras she'd photographed. Cole Whitaker hadn't just threatened her. He'd reached into her life and turned off the money like a switch. She checked the email again and saw the restriction reason. Pending investigation. Contact Whitaker Legal. Her stomach flipped. He'd filed it under her name. If she fought, he could say she was unstable, unfit, and push for a custody review. The trap wasn't the house, it was paperwork alone. A knock rattled the back door. Under it slid a manila envelope stamped "County Notice" in red. Laura tore it open and read the first line twice, not breathing. Her occupancy permit was being revoked, effective immediately. The town hall in Maple Hollow sat across from the courthouse, a brick box with an American flag snapping in cold wind. Inside, fluorescent lights made everyone's skin look tired. Folding chairs filled the room, and a tripod camera blinked red beside a sign. Public meeting, recorded. Laura held Mia's mittened hand and kept her shoulders straight. The occupancy revocation notice was folded in her pocket like a blade. She'd dressed in her cleanest scrubs jacket because it was the closest thing she owned to authority. Mia's breath puffed softly through her scarf, each inhale a reminder of why Laura couldn't lose heat, shelter, or stability. At the front, a long table faced the crowd. A microphone sat at its center, foam cover worn thin, waiting to turn private misery into public sound. Behind it, a pull-down screen glowed with the county seal, ready for the clerk to project documents for transparency. Neighbors filed in, whispering. Some avoided Laura. Some stared openly, curious the way people get around accidents on the highway. Deputy Harlan stood near the back wall, arms crossed, watchful. And when his eyes met Laura's, he gave a nod, as if promising he'd remember everything he saw. Then Cole Whitaker arrived. Last night he'd been a threat in her foyer. This morning he walked in smiling, carrying a box of donuts for the council and shaking hands like a man who paid for the building's new roof. His suit was replaced by a navy blazer and a striped tie. Small town respectable. 2 women laughed at something he said. A councilman clapped him on the shoulder. Cole glanced at Laura and Mia, just once. No sneer, no open contempt, only a polite, empty look, the kind reserved for people you plan to erase. The clerk called the meeting to order. Papers rustled. The camera's red light stayed steady. Laura's phone buzzed with another bank alert she didn't open. She watched Cole slide a folder onto the table, thick with exhibits. A sticker on the front read, Whittaker Legal, Evidence Submission. Mia squeezed Laura's fingers. "Mom," she whispered, "are they going to make us leave today?" Laura forced a smile. "Not if I can help it." The projector whirred and the first page filled the screen. Her name in bold, beneath the words, Fraud Investigation Hold. Cole rose, adjusted the microphone, and said, "For the record, I'd like Mrs. Bennett to answer one simple question." Cole's voice carried through the microphone like he'd practiced in an empty room. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, "did you or did you not enter the Blackridge property knowing it was tied to an unresolved claim?" A murmur rippled across the chairs. Laura felt every eye slide to her thrifted jacket, the single mom who didn't belong in a room full of landowners. "I inherited it," she said. "I legally." Cole clicked a remote. On the screen appeared a scanned signature page. Eleanor Blackridge's name, then Laura's, then a bold stamp. Disputed. "Interesting," he said, "because my firm received an affidavit at 6:02 a.m., alleging the will was altered after Ms. Blackridge's death." "That's a lie," Laura snapped, then caught herself. Mia's hand trembled in hers. Cole turned, smile thin. "Let's keep our tone respectful. This is a public record meeting. We're all neighbors here." He wasn't a neighbor, Laura realized. He was the town. Everyone in Maple Hollow knew the mansion sat on the last undeveloped ridge above the river. Cole had been lobbying to turn it into a heritage resort with condos and a private clinic. His name on the plaque, his profit in the ground today. Cole introduced himself like a civic hero. President of Whittaker Holdings, counsel for the Redevelopment Committee, donor to the firehouse, volunteer advisor to code enforcement. Each title landed like a chain around her ankles. He didn't need to shout, he just needed to point. "Mrs. Bennett's occupancy permit was issued prematurely," he continued, nodding to the clerk. "Given the fraud hold, the county must suspend utilities and restrict access until the court confirms rightful ownership." Deputy Harlan shifted. "Cole, that's not standard." Cole's gaze iced him over. "Deputy, I appreciate your service, but procedure protects everyone." Then he looked at Laura, softer, crueler. "You have a child with medical needs. You have a father in rehab. If you cooperate, I can expedite assistance housing and connect you with resources. But if you fight, this investigation follows you, employment checks, custody reviews, benefit audits. That's not a threat. That's reality." Laura's knees went weak. He knew everything. Cole clicked again. A photo filled the screen. Her mansion's foyer, the grandfather clock glass open, the red light blinking. In the corner of the image, a small silver label was visible. Whittaker Security Services. Cole leaned into the mic and said, "Cut her power today and post the notice now." Paige Larkin glided to the table as if the building belonged to her, heels clicking a clean rhythm on the scuffed floor. She wore a cream blouse and a pearl pin shaped like a dogwood flower, the kind of tasteful accessory that said respectable, until you saw her eyes. They didn't look at Laura like a neighbor. They looked at her like a problem to be processed. "Yeah, council members," Paige said, taking the remote from Cole with practiced ease. "I'll pull the clerk's file so we can clarify the timeline." She smiled for the recording camera, then turned just enough to hide her screen from the crowd. Laura recognized her. Paige ran the county records desk, the woman who stamped permits, filed liens, and lost paperwork when people annoyed the wrong donor. Last year, Laura had stood at that same counter begging for a payment plan on Dad's rehab bill, and Paige had said without blinking, "Maybe you should have married better." Now Paige clicked to a new slide. Laura's address, old apartment, flashed up, along with a list of late fees. Then a screenshot of her bank restriction notice. Gasps, whispers. Laura's cheeks burned. "That information is private," Laura said. Paige tilted her head. Public interest, Mrs. Bennett. Fraud investigations affect taxpayers. She held up a manila folder with a red stamp, and Laura's stomach turned when she saw the header. Family Services Intake? Mia's fingers tightened around her inhaler. Cole stepped closer to Paige, too close for coworkers. His hand brushed the small of her back, possessive and casual. Paige didn't flinch. She leaned into it like it was normal. You filed that, Laura said, voice low. You don't even know my child. Paige's smile thinned. I know patterns. Single mother. No fixed address. Unverified inheritance. That raises concerns. Deputy Harlan took a step forward. Paige, you can't just wave a CPS form around. Paige cut him off, sweet as syrup. Deputy, I'm not waving, I'm documenting. If Mrs. Bennett is displaced today, the county needs to know where the minor will sleep tonight. The room went quiet in a different way. Less gossip, more judgment. Laura felt it land like a verdict. The camera light blinked, steady, merciless. Paige tapped her phone once, eyes never leaving Laura's face. The projector switched to a photo of Mia's school medical file, and Paige said, Let's talk about her asthma attacks. Paige's finger traced the projected chart like a teacher grading a failing paper. 3 emergency room visits in 6 months, she read. 7 absences in 1 quarter. Notes signed by the same parent. Mrs. Bennett, are you aware the district flags patterns like this? Laura's face burned. She's sick, she said. I take her to the doctor. A man in the second row snorted. Some folks take their kids to the ER for attention. A few laughs. Mia shrank behind Laura's hip, clutching her inhaler. Paige kept her smile. No one is accusing you, ma'am. We're simply documenting risk. She clicked again. A form appeared titled Temporary Displacement Plan. If the county suspends occupancy, we need to know where the minor will reside tonight. Cole folded his hands, saintly. I can help, he said. My company partners with a motel on Route 9. Clean rooms, stable address. All you have to do is sign an agreement to vacate the Blackridge house voluntarily until the investigation ends. In other words, Laura said, voice tight, you want me gone? Cole shrugged. I want your child safe. And frankly, Mrs. Bennett, you're in over your head. That house is a hazard. You're a guest there, not an owner. The insult landed hard. Guest like she was trespassing in her own life. Now Laura stepped toward the microphone, but Paige slid it away from her with a small, practiced movement. One speaker at a time, Paige said, eyes bright. And please, keep emotions controlled for the recording. Mia coughed, dry and sharp. Laura knelt, rubbed her back, and felt the little ribs moving too fast under her palm. She dug out the inhaler, praying it wasn't empty. The crowd watched, half pity, half judgment, like they were waiting to see if the kid would make a scene. Deputy Harlan finally spoke. This is getting personal. We're supposed to discuss permits, not medical files. Cole's smile never changed. Permits are about safety. Safety involves the child. Laura got Mia breathing again and hurried into the hallway for air. Behind a corkboard of Lost Dog flyers, she heard low voices in the side office. Cole and Paige, not bothering to whisper. Cut power at noon, Paige said, and pull the clock footage. If she sees what's in the foundation, we're finished. Laura froze, realizing they weren't after the house. They were after what was buried under it and planned to take it. Laura drove back to the mansion with Mia in the passenger seat, both of them silent, the town hall's whispers still clinging to their coats. Noon was the deadline Paige had bragged about. If the power went off, the cameras would too, or worse, the footage would vanish into Cole Whitaker's hands. Inside, the house felt colder, as if it knew. Laura went straight to the grandfather clock and opened the lower panel. Behind the pendulum, she found a black plastic box zip-tied to the frame, a tiny green light pulsing beside a slot labeled SD. Someone had installed this recently, not 30 years ago. She snapped more photos, then slid the card out like it might bite. In the basement, the electrical panel had a fresh sticker. Whittaker Security Services, 24/7 monitoring. Taped under it was an itemized invoice dated 2 days before Aunt Eleanor died, billing surveillance retrofit and remote access setup to Cole's corporate account. Laura's hands shook as she folded the paper into her wallet. Upstairs, she set her laptop on a box and inserted the SD card. A folder opened. Foyer_cam, parlor_cam, stair_rail. The first clip showed Cole in her foyer at 11:46 p.m., talking to Paige, neither of them aware the microphone was hot. Cole's voice was clear. We cut her funds, we cut her utilities, and we get into the foundation before she does. Paige laughed. She'll sign anything once the kid can't breathe. Laura's stomach turned, but she kept recording the screen with her phone, capturing timestamps and faces. Then she uploaded the files to a cloud drive under a new password and emailed the link to Deputy Harlan with the subject line, "Proof they set me up." Mia tugged her sleeve. "Mom, there's a car." Gravel crunched outside. A county cruiser stopped at the curb. Deputy Harlan stepped onto the porch, hat in hand, eyes tight with urgency. "Mrs. Bennett," he called, "they're sending code enforcement to post an eviction notice. Do you have anything that shows Whittaker's involved?" Laura opened the door and held out the invoice and her phone. She also handed him the photos of the sticker and a still frame from the clip. Cole's face under the timestamp, his hand on the clock's glass. Harlan read, jaw working, then looked at the blinking clock behind her. "I'm logging this as evidence, and I'll swear to it," he said. At 11:52 a.m., 2 county trucks rolled up the drive, tires grinding gravel like teeth. A utility worker in a neon vest headed straight for the meter, while Code Enforcement Officer Dugan climbed the porch steps with a staple gun and a clipboard. Laura met them at the door, Deputy Harlan at her side. "I've filed a report, ma'am," he murmured. "But they're moving fast." Officer Dugan didn't look up. "Occupancy permit revoked. Utilities suspended. You'll need to vacate until compliance inspection is complete." He slapped a bright orange notice onto the doorframe where Mia could see it. Mia tugged Laura's sleeve. "Mom, is the heater going off?" Her breath whistled on the last word, and the utility worker twisted the shutoff and the house exhaled. Lights dead, fridge quiet, the grandfather clock's red eye blinking once, then going dark. Laura felt panic spike. No power meant no nebulizer. A black SUV eased in behind the trucks. Cole Whittaker stepped out as if he owned the sky. Paige Larkin followed, clutching a folder with a red seal. Cole offered Laura a pen. "Sign the voluntary relocation agreement, and I'll authorize a generator delivery tonight. Refuse, and your child's medical equipment becomes your responsibility in a powerless building you're not permitted to occupy." "That's extortion," Harlan said, voice hard. Paige lifted her phone. "And this is documentation," she replied. "An unsafe structure, a minor with respiratory issues, a parent refusing lawful orders." Laura stared at the pen. If she signed, and she surrendered the only roof she had. If she didn't, Mia might wheeze her way into another ER bill or into Paige's waiting file. From the upstairs rail, a tiny lens caught the daylight and flashed, still running on backup. Laura remembered the uploaded clips, the invoice, Harlan's promise to swear. She set her jaw. "No," she said. "You don't get to buy my silence." Cole's smile vanished. He opened Paige's folder, slid out one final sheet, and held it so the orange notice behind it looked like a warning label. "Then we do it the ugly way," he said. Officer Dugan reached for his radio. In the yard, 2 neighbors filmed with their phones, hungry for proof. Mia's cough returned, thin and scared. Harlan's hand hovered near his badge, torn between duty and decency right there now. "This is an emergency petition to remove Mia from your care. Filed 30 minutes ago." A white county sedan followed the trucks, and a woman in a gray cardigan stepped out holding a clipboard. Her badge read, "Child Protective Services." She didn't look at Cole, she looked at Mia. Laura Bennett? The woman asked. Laura's mouth went numb. Yes, who are you? Caseworker Ramirez. I'm here under an emergency order. She held up stamped papers. The orange eviction notice flapped beside it like a flag of shame. Cole spoke first, loud for the neighbors' phones. For the record, Mrs. Bennett refused relocation assistance. The child's medical needs are not being met in an unsafe structure. Page added, and she's under investigation for fraud. Mia's eyes filled. Mom, am I in trouble? Laura crouched, forcing her voice gentle. No, honey. Yucks, you did nothing wrong. Ramirez read from the page, every word a hammer. Temporary protective custody pending a hearing. Ma'am, you may pack a bag for the minor. The yard seemed to tilt. Two older women across the street whispered, hands over mouths. A man zoomed in with his camera. Laura's wedding band on its chain slipped from her collar and tapped her chest, a tiny metallic reminder of vows that hadn't protected her. Deputy Harlan stepped forward. This order was filed 30 minutes ago, he said. Who signed it? Page's smile was bright. Judge Klein, ex parte, standard. It's not standard, Harlan muttered, but he didn't draw his weapon. He couldn't. This was paper violence. Laura pulled out her phone to show Ramirez the uploaded clips, but the screen died at 1%. No power, no proof. Then her hands shook so hard she nearly dropped Mia's inhaler. Cole leaned close, voice low, venom sweet. One signature and I call this off. Laura looked at Mia, then at Ramirez's waiting hand. Please, she said to the caseworker, my daughter needs her nebulizer. Let me plug it in at the neighbors. Ramirez's face softened, just a fraction. Ma'am, we'll make sure she's safe. Mia started crying, silent at first, then ragged. Mom, don't let them take me. Laura wrapped her arms around her, breathing in shampoo and fear. The neighbors filmed. Cole watched like a man watching an auction. Ramirez reached for Mia's backpack. Mia clung to Laura's neck, and the inhaler slipped, skittering across the porch boards into view. Deputy Harlan raised his phone and yelled, Stop! I have video proving this was staged for everyone to see. Deputy Harlan's phone was up in the air, screen glowing as he hit play. A tinny clip spilled out. Cole's voice, Page's laugh, the words cut her funds, cut her utilities. For 1 second, the yard went still. Then Cole clapped once, sharp and loud. That's illegally obtained, he announced to the neighbors' cameras. A manipulated recording from a private security system. Folks, don't be fooled by a desperate con. Page lifted her own tablet and angled it toward the crowd. Official notice, she said brightly. Fraud hold confirmed. Permit revoked. CPS responding for child safety. She didn't say staged. She didn't have to. People heard what they wanted to hear. Scandal. A woman Laura recognized from church tightened her lips and turned her back. When a man who'd borrowed Laura's jumper cables last winter muttered, knew there was something off, and stepped away like shame could rub off. Someone whispered, poor kid. And someone else answered, kids get taken when moms make bad choices. Laura reached for the microphone that wasn't there, for the fair hearing that never came. Please, she said, voice cracking. I have proof. I have... Officer Dugan moved between her and the caseworker. Ma'am, stop interfering! Mia sobbed, hands stretched toward Laura. Caseworker Ramirez looked torn, but she kept her body squared, trained not to blink at a mother breaking in public. We'll reassess after the hearing, she said softly, as if softness could replace custody. Deputy Harlan stepped closer to Cole. You filed this in bad faith, he hissed. Cole leaned in, smiling for the phones. Careful, deputy. You don't want complaints on your badge. The utility worker tossed his gloves into the truck bed. Sorry, ma'am, he said without meeting Laura's eyes. Orders are orders. A cruiser door opened. Mia was guided inside, her backpack sliding off one shoulder. Laura tried to follow, but Paige blocked her with a folder, holding it like a wall. "Sign the receipt," Paige said. "Acknowledging transfer." Laura's hands shook too hard to hold the pen. The cruiser pulled away anyway, tires spitting gravel. Only when the dust settled did Laura realize her tote bag wasn't on the porch. Her probate papers, the SD card, the spare inhaler. Across the driveway, Paige's cream sleeve flashed as she tucked the tote into Cole's SUV. And the SUV's back window rolled down, revealing Mia's terrified face watching her evidence disappear right there. Now, Laura didn't remember walking from the porch to the dark kitchen. One moment she was staring at the dust trail of the SUV, the next she was on cold tile back against the cabinets, listening to the house settle like an old lung. Her hands smelled like Mia's shampoo in panic. The chain around her neck dug into her skin. The wedding band on it swung when she breathed, tapping a soft, guilty rhythm. She pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from screaming and tasted salt. On the counter sat the nebulizer mask, useless without power. Beside it lay Mia's stuffed rabbit, left behind when Ramirez hurried her to the cruiser. Laura pulled it to her chest and rocked, crying silently at first, then shaking hard enough to make the cabinet doors rattle. No audience now, no phones. Just the truth of an empty room. In her head, she replayed Cole's calm voice. "Cooperate, and I make this go away." She replayed Paige's smile as her tote vanished into the SUV probate papers, the SD card, the spare inhaler, everything she'd gathered to prove she wasn't crazy or criminal or unfit. She wiped her face with her sleeve and forced herself to stand. She couldn't afford collapse. Frank's rehab bill didn't pause for grief, and neither would a judge. If Paige wanted a narrative, Laura would bring facts. Timestamps, invoices, witnesses. Deputy Harlan's sworn report. The cloud link she'd sent before the power died. Laura crossed to the grandfather clock, running her fingers over the dead glass. "I'm done begging," she said aloud, voice rough in the silence. I'm done being polite while they carve up my child." She found a flashlight in a drawer and a legal pad from a moving box. Under the beam, she wrote a list. 1. Call, Harlan. 2. Get motel receipt from Whitaker. Charity. 3. Subpoena County email logs. 4. Ask school nurse for access report 5. Demand hearing date. She pictured Mia on a motel bed, wet, asking for her mom, while Cole counted minutes like money and waited for her to break. Her phone finally caught a weak bar of service. The screen lit, and for a heartbeat she feared it would die again. Then it rang. A calm male voice said, "Mrs. Bennett, this is Judge Klein's clerk. We need to talk about who filed that emergency petition." The call dropped twice before it held. "Mrs. Bennett," the clerk said, "Judge Klein didn't see any medical neglect in the file. He saw fear. Here, the petition came through the county records portal under an employee login after midnight." Laura pressed her forehead to the dark pantry door. "Paige," she whispered. "I can't accuse anyone," he said quickly. "But your hearing is set for Friday at 9 a.m. Bring proof of housing, utilities, and prescriptions. And get counsel. If you miss it, the order stands." When the line went dead, reality rushed in. No power, no Mia, no money. She drove to Route 9 Motel anyway, hands tight on the wheel, praying she could at least see her daughter through the glass office window. The desk clerk shook his head. "No visits without CPS approval. Whitaker paid for the room. It's under his company account." Laura's stomach twisted. Cole had bought her child like a reservation. Next, she went to Maple Hollow Rehab, clutching her last $20, and the receptionist slid a ledger across the counter. "Balance is past due, Ms. Bennett. We can't release medication without the copay." Behind the door, she heard her father's wheelchair squeak, then a low, frustrated sound that might have been his voice. "I'll pay," Laura lied, cheeks burning. She turned away before they saw her cry. At the care facility, HR met her in the hallway. "You missed 2 shifts," the manager said, eyes hard with pity. We can't keep a per diem employee who's unreliable. I'm sorry. Unreliable. Like she'd chosen this. By dusk, she sat in her powerless mansion, wrapped in a blanket coat, writing a budget that made no sense. She stared at her CloudLink email, still unread by anyone with authority, and at the orange notice stapled to her door like a scar. She dialed 3 legal aid numbers. One went to voicemail, one quoted a retainer she couldn't imagine, and the third warned her the Whitakers sat on the board that funded them in this county last year. A car crunched up the drive. Laura stood, heart racing, expecting Cole. Instead, an older man in a wool cap approached, carrying a small folder and a church bulletin. He didn't ask her name. He simply said, I was in that hallway at town hall. I heard what they said. And I'm willing to swear it under oath. The clerk's warning replayed in Laura's head as she drove to Route 9 Motel, hands tight on the wheel, breath fogging the windshield. Friday at 9 a.m. Proof of housing, utilities, prescriptions, get counsel. If you miss it, the order stands. At the motel office, the night manager pointed to a clipboard. Paid under Whitaker Holdings, he said. CPS rules, no visits, no room number. Laura asked anyway, voice cracking, and the man's gaze slid away like he was ashamed to look at her. She went straight to Maple Hollow Rehab, hoping at least her father's nurse would let her see Frank. The receptionist met her with a printed balance sheet. Your account is delinquent, she said. Medication refills require today's copay. Laura's throat closed. She pictured Frank's trembling hand, the way he tried to write her name after the stroke. She offered the last 20 in her wallet. Please, she said, put the rest on a plan. The receptionist didn't soften. We don't do plans without an active card. Outside the rehab center, snow started to fall, thin as ash. Laura sat in her car and called her ex. Voicemail. She called legal aid. A recorded message said appointments were booked for weeks. She called the church office. The secretary said Pastor Grant was in a meeting and suggested prayer. By afternoon, her employer finally returned her message. Laura, we heard about the CPS situation, her supervisor said, careful and cold. Until this is resolved, we can't have you on the schedule. Families talk. The line clicked off before Laura could answer. Back at the mansion, the cold seeped into her bones. She lit 2 candles and opened a notebook, listing what she still had. The CloudLink, Harlan's number, and her own memory. She wrote down every timestamp she remembered, every name in the room, every insult paged through like a stone. A knock came at dusk. Laura stiffened, expecting Cole. Instead, an older man stood on the porch in a wool coat, holding a folded church bulletin and a small flash drive. Mrs. Bennett? He asked. I'm Walter Pierce. I run the courthouse AV system. His hands shook as he offered it, like a man choosing sides after a lifetime of silence. He lowered his voice. I copied the hallway audio before Paige could delete it. And I'm ready to testify that Whitaker planned this. Walter Pierce didn't step past the threshold until Laura nodded. The old courthouse technician smelled faintly of solder and peppermint, like someone who fixed broken things for a living. He set a small portable battery pack on the counter, then plugged in a lamp. Warm light filled the kitchen, gentle but stubborn. I'm not a lawyer, Walter said, but I know records, and I know when someone's trying to erase them. He handed Laura the flash drive. This is the hallway audio you overheard. Clean copy, time-stamped from the building system. And I also pulled the town hall meeting feed. Paige can wave whatever she wants on a projector, but she can't change what the county camera recorded. Laura's fingers closed around the drive like it was oxygen. They took my tote, she said. My papers, the SD card. Walter nodded as if he'd expected that. He opened his folder and slid out a printed sheet labeled Portal Access Log. That CPS petition? Filed at 12:41 a.m. from the records office computer. Employee login, P. Larkin. Same machine submitted your bank restriction request at 12:58 a.m. Then someone exported your daughter's school medical file at 1:12 a.m. Laura stared until the numbers blurred. You can prove it? I can testify to chain of custody, Walter said. I pulled these logs before they could be overwritten. You and I already copied them to 2 locations Paige doesn't control. A knock sounded, fast and coded. Deputy Harlan slipped in, shoulders hunched against the cold. Walter extended a hand. Deputy, you asked for something solid. This is solid. Harlan scanned the log, jaw tightening. This puts her at the keyboard. It puts her credentials at the keyboard, Walter corrected. But I can show who walked into the building after hours, too. He plugged the flash drive into Laura's laptop and connected the battery pack. The screen lit. A folder opened. Courthouse_lobby_cam-night. Walter looked at Laura, voice low. Tomorrow morning, 7:30, we meet Judge Klein's clerk with an affidavit and these files. You walk into that hearing with evidence, not tears. I called Sylvia Marsh. She owes me a favor and will stand beside you in court. And Laura swallowed hard, the first real breath she'd taken all day. Will it be enough to get Mia back? Walter hit play. On the grainy video, Cole Whitaker entered the courthouse at 12:37 a.m. and handed Paige a thick envelope. Walter's battery pack kept the laptop alive while wind rattled the boarded windows. Sylvia Marsh arrived before sunrise. Gray hair pinned tight, coat dusted with snow, a retired assistant attorney general who still carried a courthouse calm. She listened without interrupting as Laura laid out the timeline. The town hall humiliation, the permit revocation, the shutoff, the CPS grab. Show me what a judge can't ignore, Sylvia said. Deputy Harlan placed Walter's flash drive on the table. The first file was the hallway recording, Cole ordering the power cut and Paige promising to pull the clock footage. And the second was the portal log printout, showing Paige's login submitting the emergency petition and exporting Mia's medical file. The third was courthouse lobby video, Cole at 12:37 a.m., handing Paige a thick envelope, Paige slipping it into her tote like it weighed nothing at all. Sylvia's eyes narrowed. Chain of custody? Walter slid over a notarized statement he'd typed at the courthouse, then a second page signed by Harlan. I copied the files directly from the county system, Walter said. Same checksum on both backups. Laura added the Whitaker security invoice from the mansion's panel and the photos of the hidden cameras. He surveilled me before I got here, she said. He knew exactly where to press. Sylvia began building an evidence binder. Tabs, dates, still frames, transcripts. She wrote in block letters. Malice. Intent. Coercion. This gets the CPS order tossed, she said, and it opens the door to criminal charges. Hope flared in Laura's chest. Small, painful, real. Laura set Mia's rabbit beside the binder like a witness. Sylvia dictated a motion to quash the emergency order, citing due process and fabricated records. She scheduled a call with the clerk at 7:30 and told Laura to bring receipts and Frank's billing statements. Then Sylvia looked up. But we still need one piece that ties Whitaker to the money. The envelope could be anything. The court will ask, where's the quid? Harlan's phone buzzed. He listened, then held it out to Laura. On the screen was a live alert from Whitaker Security. Remote backup transfer. Stair rail cam in progress. Walter's face went pale. He's pulling your stolen SD card to his server, he said. If we intercept that upload, we'll have the original footage and his access trail. Sylvia snapped her laptop open and said, Then we catch it tonight, while he thinks you're powerless. At 10:18 p.m., Sylvia drove them to Whitaker Security's office above the hardware store where light still burned behind frosted glass. Deputy Harlan had called ahead with an emergency preservation order signed by Judge Klein's on-call magistrate, citing imminent deletion of evidence in a child custody case. 2 uniformed officers followed, not for show, but because Cole Whitaker never played fair. A young tech opened the door, saw the paperwork, and went pale. "Mr. Whitaker isn't here," he stammered. "Good," Sylvia said. "Then you won't have to choose between your job and prison. Show us the backup console." In a cramped server room, Nafans whined over a row of black boxes. Walter pointed at a screen labeled Remote Ingest, stare_rail_cam. The transfer bar crawled forward. "That's her stolen SD image," he said. "And look, remote user." Harlan leaned closer. Cole.W at Whitaker Holdings. Sylvia's pen scratched across her affidavit. Chain of access, perfect. The tech clicked through logs, hands shaking, and pulled up the folder Cole had created hours earlier. Bennett_leverage. Inside were Mia's school exports, Laura's bank holds, and at the bottom, an MP4 titled Eleanor_Blackridge_final. Laura's breath caught. The video opened on Aunt Eleanor sitting in the mansion parlor, the grandfather clock behind her blinking red. "If you're watching this," Eleanor said, "Cole Whitaker has come for what his father stole. And he'll call me eccentric and my will disputed, but I filed the original deed and trust addendum in the courthouse vault. Laura Bennett is my blood. She is the rightful heir." Eleanor lifted a thin envelope. Inside is the key to the foundation vault and the names of two witnesses, Walter Pierce and Judge Klein's clerk. They kept copies because I knew Cole would try to erase the record. Laura stared at Sylvia, chest tight. "He did all of this because of what's under my house." Sylvia met her eyes. "You're not powerless. You were targeted because you're the one person he can't buy." Harlan printed the logs. Walter copied the video to 3 drives. Sylvia sealed the packet in evidence tape, then nodded toward the door. "Tomorrow we file for sanctions, an arrest warrant for tampering, and an immediate return hearing." If Cole claimed the will was altered, Sylvia would subpoena the vault copy, the notarized witnesses, and these server logs showing his midnight envelope transfer to Paige Larkin. And at dawn, Laura would walk back into that mansion with Eleanor's key. Dawn came steel gray, and Laura washed in a bowl of warmed water Sylvia heated on a camp stove. She braided her hair tight, not for beauty, but for battle, and pinned Mia's rabbit to the top of the evidence binder with a paperclip, like a promise. Sylvia spread documents across the kitchen table, the courthouse lobby video stills, the portal access logs, the Whitaker security server export, Aunt Eleanor's recorded statement, and Harlan's incident report. "We go in with a story the judge can follow," Sylvia said. "Who did what, when, where, use why, and what it cost a child." Laura nodded and began making calls. The school nurse confirmed Mia's asthma plan and emailed a letter stating Laura had always supplied medication. The rehab facility printed Frank's billing history, showing the sudden insurance rejection, hit the same night Paige filed the portal petition. Harlan texted that he'd photographed the orange notice and logged the utility shutoff with the worker's name and time. At 7:12 a.m., Laura drove to the mansion and used Eleanor's key on the side door. Inside, the cold still bit, but the house no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a witness. In the parlor, the grandfather clock blinked again. Backup power restored, and she filmed its label, then filmed herself saying the date, the time, and the fact that Whitaker Security controlled the system without her consent. She taped a handwritten sign to the front door. All entry recorded. No consent given. Then she turned to Sylvia and said, "No more secret meetings. No more help with strings. If Cole wants something from under this house, he can ask a judge." Sylvia studied her. "You ready to hear them call you names again?" Laura touched the wedding band on her chain and let it drop. "Let them. I'm not begging for my own child. I'm taking her back." They loaded the binder, 2 backup drives, and the key into a plain tote. Walter waited in his truck, engine running, and Harlan followed behind in his cruiser, lights off but present. At the courthouse steps, Laura inhaled once, steady and deep. She swapped her scrubs jacket for Sylvia's black blazer, squared the tote on her shoulder, and reviewed the binder tabs. Video, logs, invoice, affidavits, A vault deed. Then she pushed the doors open wide. Inside the lobby, Cole Whitaker was already there, holding Mia's inhaler like a bargaining chip. Cole stood by the security arch in the courthouse lobby, twirling Mia's blue inhaler between two fingers like it was his. "She forgot this at the motel," he said, loud enough for people waiting in line to hear. "You can have it back after you sign." Laura didn't reach for it. She set Sylvia's black blazer straighter on her shoulders and shifted the evidence binder against her hip. The binder was thick, tabbed, and duplicated. One copy for the judge, one for the clerk, one for the record. Walter and Harlan flanked her like quiet guardrails. Sylvia stepped forward first. "Mr. Whitaker, you're interfering with a custody matter and withholding a medical device. Hand it over." Cole's smile was polite, poisonous. "Counselor, I'm offering a solution. Mrs. Bennett signs a temporary transfer of the Blackridge property to a neutral trustee, my trustee, and the county's concerns disappear." Harlan's eyes hardened. "That's not neutral." Paige appeared near the elevator, hair perfect, phone already raised to record. "Morning," she sang. "Everyone ready to cooperate?" Laura felt the old heat of humiliation rise. Then she breathed it down. She pictured Mia's face behind the SUV glass, her evidence being stolen. She pictured Frank's room, the balance sheet, the word delinquent. She let those images turn into fuel, not tears. "I'm done negotiating in hallways," Laura said. Her voice surprised her. Steady, adult, unbreakable. "We're going in front of a judge." Sylvia nodded and held out a copy of the preservation order. "And we're filing sanctions for fabricated records, illegal surveillance, and coercion." Sylvia slid a second motion beneath it. Request for immediate return of the child and an order to restore utilities pending litigation. She looked at Laura. "Answer only what you know. Let the documents talk. Let witnesses speak. No more guessing. No more apologizing." Cole's jaw tightened for the first time. "You think a retired prosecutor and a courthouse tech can beat me?" Walter lifted a sealed envelope. "This came from the vault at 7:05 a.m. Original deed and trust addendum. Signed, notarized, logged." From the corridor, caseworker Ramirez approached with Mia beside her, small hand wrapped around a paper cup of water. Mia's eyes found Laura's and widened. Hope and fear tangled together. The bailiff opened the courtroom door. "Bennett versus County," he called. "All parties inside." Cole finally dropped the inhaler into Laura's palm and whispered, "If you play that video, your father's rehab bed disappears today." Courtroom 2S. B smelled of old paper and winter coats. Judge Klein sat high, glasses low, eyes sharp. Cole Whitaker rose first, polished as ever. "Your Honor, this woman is squatting in a disputed estate and endangering a minor." Sylvia stood. "No, Judge, this court was used as a weapon. We're moving to quash the emergency custody order, restore utilities, and sanction Whitaker and records clerk Paige Larkin for fabrication and coercion." Klein's gaze flicked to Paige. "Ms. Larkin, you filed the petition?" Paige's smile held. "Under procedure, yes." "Then let the record speak," Sylvia said, handing the clerk 3 binders. Tabs flashed. Video, logs, keyed invoice, vault deed, affidavits. "Play Exhibit A." Walter walked to the monitor, hands steady. The hallway audio filled the room. Cole ordering the power cut, Paige laughing about the kid